Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all, wherever you are tuning in from tonight. Maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful, with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher, and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. The snow fell softly over Bond Street that December evening in 1935, blanketing the glittering shop windows in a veil of white innocence. Inside Hargrove and Sons, the renowned jewelers, the air was thick with the scent of polished mahogany and the hushed excitement of London's elite. Sir Reginald Hargrove's winter collection, a dazzling array of diamonds said to rival the crown jewels, was on private exhibition, guarded behind velvet ropes and reinforced glass, but safety proved illusory. As the clock struck 9, a scream pierced the murmur of admiration. In the center of the salon, beneath the chandelier's icy sparkle, lay Sir Reginald Hargrove, his throat slashed, blood staining the snow-white carpet like scattered rubies. And the centerpiece of the collection, the magnificent winter star diamond necklace worth a king's ransom, had vanished. The glittering assembly. The snow fell in thick, silent flakes over Bond Street that December evening in 1935, muffling the clatter of motor cars and the distant cries of newspaper vendors. Inside the establishment of Hargrove and Sons, one of the most revered jewelers in all London, the atmosphere was one of hushed reverence and barely concealed excitement. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, casting 1,000 fractured rainbows across the polished mahogany counters and the velvet-lined display cases. The air carried the faint, expensive scent of beeswax, hothouse flowers, and the subtle perfume of the assembled elite. Sir Reginald Hargrove's winter collection was unveiled that night in a private exhibition for a select few. The invitation list had been mercilessly curtailed. Only those whose names carried weight in society or whose purses were deep enough to contemplate purchase had been admitted. The centerpiece of the collection, the magnificent winter star diamond necklace, lay beneath a dome of reinforced glass, its stones so pure and perfectly cut that they seemed to drink in the light and return it as cold fire. It was said to be worth a king's ransom, and looking upon it, one could almost believe the claim. Hercule Poirot, that diminutive Belgian, with the impeccably waxed moustaches and the egg-shaped head, stood a little apart from the throng, observing rather than mingling. He had accepted Sir Reginald's personal invitation with his customary courtesy, though he had no intention of purchasing jewels. "My dear Poirot," the jeweler had said only yesterday over luncheon at the Ritz, "your eye for symmetry and detail is unmatched. Come, reassure an anxious old man that his treasures are safe from the criminal classes." Poirot had smiled politely and agreed, for he found Sir Reginald an interesting study. A self-made man who had risen from a Whitechapel workshop to a knighted position in Mayfair, yet who retained the wariness of the streets. Now Sir Reginald moved among his guests with practiced charm, a tall figure in flawless evening dress, his silver hair gleaming, his voice resonant with pride as he described the provenance of each piece. Beside him, on his arm, was his second wife, Elena Voss, once Elena Voskova of the Warsaw stage. Radiant in sapphire silk that matched her eyes, a woman 25 years his junior, whose beauty turned heads even in this gathering of the privileged. Near the fireplace stood Victor Langford, Sir Reginald's nephew, and, until recently, heir presumptive. A handsome young man in his late 20s, Victor possessed an easy smile that did not quite reach his eyes tonight. He had been drinking rather steadily from a crystal flute of champagne, and his evening clothes, though expensive, bore the faint creases of one who had dressed in haste, or perhaps after a trying afternoon at the card tables. Miss Clarissa Beaumont, Sir Reginald's secretary of 20 years, hovered discreetly at the edge of the room. Plainly dressed in sensible navy, her iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, she appeared the very model of efficiency. Yet Poirot, whose observation missed nothing, noted the tightness about her mouth and the way her fingers worried at the clasp of her handbag whenever Sir Reginald's laughter rang out in Elena's company. And then there was Monsieur Felix Drummond, the distinguished Parisian jeweller who had crossed the Channel ostensibly for professional courtesy. Tall and lean, with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of continental sophistication, he examined the displays with the appreciative eye of a connoisseur. Yet Poirot detected a certain tension in his posture, a watchfulness that went beyond mere admiration. The rest of the company consisted of a handful of wealthy patrons and their companions, none of whom had been left unaccompanied for more than a moment. Staff were few, a butler, 2 uniformed guards stationed near the doors, and a maid who circulated with trays of champagne. At precisely 9 o'clock, as the great ormolu clock on the mantelpiece chimed the hour, a scream shattered the refined murmur of conversation. It came from near the central display, high and piercing, the sound of a woman confronted by something unthinkable. Poirot moved with surprising swiftness for one of such compact stature. He reached the heart of the salon just as others converged. There, sprawled upon the snow-white carpet beneath the chandelier's icy blaze, lay Sir Reginald Hargrove. His eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling, his throat laid open by a single savage cut. Blood had pooled beneath him, dark and spreading, staining the priceless carpet like scattered rubies. A few feet away, the reinforced glass dome that had protected the Winter Star necklace lay shattered, shards glittering amid the carnage. Yet the necklace itself was gone. For a moment the room seemed frozen, guests standing as though turned to statues. Then chaos erupted. Ladies fainted or clutched at companions. Gentlemen shouted for the police. The guards fumbled with revolvers they were plainly unaccustomed to drawing. Poirot knelt briefly beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering but not touching. The wound was clean, precise, made by a thin, sharp blade, perhaps a stiletto. Death had been almost instantaneous. He rose and surveyed the scene with calm precision, his green eyes taking in every detail. The guards swore that the alarm system had not sounded. The doors had remained locked and watched. No outsider could have entered or left. Therefore, the murderer was among those present. Poirot's gaze traveled slowly across the assembled faces. Eleanor Voss, white as chalk, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. Victor Langford, swaying slightly, his expression a mixture of shock and something less readable. Clarissa Beaumont, standing rigid, her eyes fixed upon her employer's body with an intensity that might have been grief or calculation. Felix Drummond, whose composure remained almost unnervingly intact. Then Poirot noticed something else. Lying a little distance from the body, half concealed by the fold of a velvet curtain, was a single gentleman's glove. Fine kid leather, monogrammed in discreet gold thread with the initials VL, Victor Langford's initials. Victor himself still wore both gloves, Poirot observed. Yet here was a third, apparently identical. Mon Dieu! Poirot murmured to himself. Already the little anomalies present themselves. The butler approached hesitantly. "Sir, Mr. Poirot, sir, there is something else. The office safe, it stands open." Papers scattered, Poirot's moustaches twitched. The plot, it seemed, thickened with remarkable speed. He turned to the trembling guests. "Mesdames et messieurs, I regret that no one will leave this building until the police arrive and the matter is clarified. Hercule Poirot is here, and he will see that justice is done." Chapter 2. Secrets in the Safe. Inspector Japp arrived within the half-hour, puffing and red-faced from the cold, his bowler hat and overcoat dusted with snow. He had been summoned by one of the guards, who had slipped out through a side entrance before Poirot could impose his request that no one leave. Japp took one look at the scene, the blood-soaked carpet, the shattered dome, the pale, staring faces, and gave a low whistle. "Well, Mr. Poirot," he said, shaking snow from his shoulders, "it seems you attract trouble like a magnet attracts iron filings. Murder and robbery in the same breath, and in one of the poshest establishments in London. The newspapers will have a field day." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is regrettable, mon cher Japp, but the little grey cells, they are already at work. Come, let us examine what the criminal has left for us." While constables cleared the guests into the adjoining drawing-room and a police surgeon knelt beside the body, Poirot led Japp through the narrow door behind the main counter that opened into Sir Reginald's private office. The room was small but luxurious, walnut paneling, a turkey carpet, a handsome partner's desk, and, set into the wall opposite the door, a modern steel safe whose door stood ajar. Papers lay scattered across the floor as though a sudden gust had swept through the room. Drawers had been pulled open, their contents rifled. Yet nothing appeared to have been taken at random. The disorder had a deliberate quality, as if the intruder had known precisely what he or she sought. Poirot knelt, careful not to disturb the papers more than necessary, and began to sort them with the neatness of a man arranging playing cards. Japp watched, hands in pockets, his practical policeman's mind already turning to fingerprints and alibis. "Lock's not forced," Japp observed, peering at the safe. "Picked clean. Professional job, I'd say. Or someone who knew the combination." "Or both," Poirot murmured. He lifted a heavy vellum document and studied it beneath the green-shaded desk lamp. "Ah, here is something of interest. A draft of a new will, dated only yesterday. Sir Reginald intended to leave the bulk of his fortune, the business, the houses, the investments, to his wife, Madame Helena Voss. The nephew, Mr. Victor Langford, is mentioned only to receive a small legacy of £5,000. The previous will, I am informed by Miss Beaumont, divided the estate more equitably." Japp gave another whistle. "That's motive enough for young Langford, I'd say. Disinherited overnight. And that glove with his initials lying beside the body convenient." "What?" "Too convenient, perhaps," Poirot replied softly. "But let us not leap to conclusions. Observe also this letter." He held up a single sheet of expensive cream notepaper, headed with the name of Drummond A.C., Paris. The handwriting was elegant, continental. "Monsieur Drummond proposes a merger of the two houses, Hargrove and Drummond. He speaks of mutual benefit and combining our considerable talents. Yet between the lines one senses pressure. And here," Poirot pointed to a postscript, "he mentions certain irregularities in design provenance that might prove embarrassing if made public. Blackmail, n'est-ce pas?" Japp scratched his chin. So the Frenchman had a reason to want Sir Reginald quiet. But would he risk murder in a room full of witnesses? Poirot did not answer directly. Instead, he rose and returned to the salon, where the guests waited under the watchful eyes of two constables. The body had been covered with a velvet curtain, but the blood stain remained, dark and accusing. He began with Helena Voss. She sat upon a gilt chair, her sapphire gown vivid against her pallor, a handkerchief pressed to her lips. Her eyes, when they met Poirot's, were wide and brilliant with unshed tears. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "you will forgive the necessity of questions at such a moment. Did your husband speak to you of changing his will?" She hesitated only a fraction of a second. "No, monsieur. Reginald was a private man in business matters. He told me once that I should never want for anything but details. No, and debts, madame. One hears rumors of generous tastes." Her chin lifted. "I have accounts at the best houses in Paris and London. Reginald wished me to appear as befitted his wife. If there were debts, they were his to settle." Poirot bowed and passed on to Victor Langford. The young man had sunk into a chair near the window, staring out at the falling snow. His champagne flute stood empty on a side table, and his gloves, both of them, were still upon his hands. "Monsieur Langford," Poirot began, "your uncle intended to disinherit you almost entirely. Were you aware?" Victor turned, his handsome face drawn. "Aware? He threatened it often enough after my indiscretions at the tables, but yesterday he seemed in better humor." I thought the storm had passed. His voice cracked slightly. "To think I quarreled with him only last week! And the glove found beside the body?" Victor held up his hands. "Both here, as you see. Someone is playing a cruel joke." Next, Clarissa Beaumont. She stood stiffly, her back against a display case as though seeking support from the unyielding glass. Her eyes, behind the spectacles, were red-rimmed. "Miss Beaumont," Poirot said, "you have served Sir Reginald faithfully for 20 years. Did he confide his intentions regarding the new will?" She pressed her lips together. "He mentioned reviewing his affairs. He feared disloyalty among those closest to him. But he did not show me the document. And you, mademoiselle, did you resent Madame Voss?" A flush rose in her cheeks. "I resented no one. I did my duty." Finally, Felix Drummond. The Parisian stood apart, a glass of champagne untouched in his hand, his expression one of polite detachment. "Monsieur Drummond," Poirot said, "your letter suggests difficulties between yourself and the late Sir Reginald." Drummond shrugged elegantly. "Business rivalry, monsieur. Nothing more. Sir Reginald believed I had borrowed inspiration from his designs. I believed he exaggerated. Such disagreements are common in our profession." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet you accepted his invitation to this exhibition. A gesture of reconciliation, perhaps." Drummond smiled thinly. "Or curiosity. One hears such tales of the Winter Star." As Poirot concluded his preliminary questions, a constable approached Japp with a report from the police surgeon. Death had occurred between 8:45 and 9 o'clock, precisely the period when all guests had been present in the salon. Each had been seen by others for most of that time, yet each had enjoyed brief moments of absence. To the cloakroom, to retrieve a cigarette case, to speak to the butler. Japp turned to Poirot. "Locked room, more or less. No one in or out. It's one of the guests, sure as eggs." Poirot stroked his moustaches thoughtfully. "Yes, the murderer is here. But consider. The glass dome was shattered from the inside. The shards lie inward. The alarm did not sound. The safe was opened with skill. And the footprint." He indicated a faint mark in the blood near the body. Small and narrow, the print of a woman's elegant shoe. Elena Voss had worn sapphire satin slippers that evening, with fashionably high heels. Japp's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Voss, eh? And with the will in her favor." He moved toward her, but Poirot laid a restraining hand upon his arm. "Patience, my friend. It is too soon. The criminal counts upon haste." At that moment the butler approached again, his face pale. "Mr. Poirot, sir, there's a telephone call for you. The party refuses to give a name. Says only that it is urgent, concerning the necklace." Poirot's eyebrows rose. He glanced at Jap, then followed the butler to the telephone in the office. The voice that came over the wire was low, muffled, impossible to identify as man or woman. "The Winter Star never left the room," it whispered. "You are looking in the wrong places." Then the line went dead. Poirot stood motionless for a long moment, the receiver still in his hand. Outside, the snow fell thicker than ever, erasing footprints, softening edges, hiding secrets. Chapter 3. The Anonymous Warning. The telephone receiver clicked back into its cradle with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. Poirot stood for a moment motionless, his small hands clasped behind his back, his mind turning over the whispered words like a jeweler examining a suspect stone. The Winter Star never left the room, a statement both tantalizing and infuriating, precise enough to suggest knowledge, vague enough to conceal it. He returned to the salon where the company waited under the watchful gaze of Scotland Yard. The air had grown heavy with the scent of fear and expensive perfume. The chandelier's light now seemed colder, harsher, throwing long shadows across the blood-stained carpet. Jap met him at the doorway, eyebrows raised. "Well?" the inspector demanded. "Who was it?" "An anonymous friend, apparently," Poirot replied. "Or an enemy who wishes to play games." The voice was disguised, low, muffled. The message simple. "The necklace remains here in this room." "We are advised to look more closely," Jap snorted. "A hoax, most likely, or the killer trying to muddy the waters. We've searched every inch. Cases, pockets, handbags. Nothing." "Yet the words are specific," Poirot murmured. "Not the necklace is hidden somewhere in the building. Not in the house, in the room. Here." He began to pace slowly, his patent leather shoes making soft clicks on the parquet where the carpet ended. His eyes traveled methodically. The display cases, all now empty except for the lesser pieces, the velvet draperies, the marble fireplace with its carved mantel, the tall windows frosted with snow. He paused beneath the great chandelier, tilting his head back to study its tiers of glittering crystals. "Interesting," he said softly. "The arrangement of the prisms, slightly different from earlier this evening. One might almost say rearranged." Jap followed his gaze. "You think someone climbed up there? With guests milling about?" "Impossible." "Not impossible," Poirot corrected gently. "Merely difficult and dangerous. No, I think not the chandelier. But the suggestion is useful. The eye. It sees what it expects to see. We must look where we do not expect." He turned his attention once more to the guests. Elena Voss had recovered something of her composure. She sat with her hands folded in her lap. Though the knuckles were white, Victor Langford paced near the fireplace, restless as a caged animal. Clarissa Beaumont remained at the edge of the group, her face pale and set. Felix Drummond lounged in an armchair, seemingly the least disturbed of them all, yet his eyes followed Poirot with wary interest. Poirot addressed them collectively, his voice calm and measured. "Mesdames et messieurs, the police will soon begin a more thorough search of persons and possessions. It will be unpleasant, but necessary. Before that occurs, I ask if anyone wishes to speak, to correct any small inaccuracy that may have been given in haste." Silence answered him. Then Elena Voss spoke, her voice low but clear. "I have nothing to add, Monsieur Poirot. Reginald and I were happy. I knew nothing of debts that could not be managed, and I did not kill him." Victor stopped pacing. "Nor did I. Uncle was angry, yes. He threatened to cut me off entirely. But I would not have taken his life for money. I loved the old man in my way." Miss Beaumont said nothing, though her fingers tightened on her handbag. Drummond merely inclined his head. "I am, as always, at your disposal, gentlemen." Poirot nodded and turned to Jap. "Perhaps, my friend, we might begin with the cloakroom." Coats, furs, handbags, all must be examined. As constables moved to comply, Poirot drew Japp aside. There is another detail. The footprint in the blood, small, feminine. Madame Voss wears high heels tonight. Miss Beaumont's shoes are more sensible, but still small. Yet neither appears to have blood on their soles. And Monsieur Langford's glove, his initials, yet he insists both his gloves remain with him. Japp grunted. Planted, you think? Almost certainly. But by whom? And for what purpose? The search of the cloakroom yielded nothing. No necklace, no blood-stained stiletto, no incriminating letters. But one item caused Poirot to pause. A woman's evening glove, black satin, lying half-tucked into the pocket of Elena Voss's sable coat. It was not stained, yet its presence struck him as odd. Elena had worn both gloves upon arrival. Why should one be removed? He did not comment aloud. Instead, he returned to the salon and addressed Victor once more. Monsieur Langford, you mentioned a quarrel with your uncle last week. Of what nature? Victor flushed. Money. I asked for an advance on my allowance. He refused. Said I had spent enough on horses and cards. He was harsh. And tonight? Did you speak with him privately? Only for a moment, near the display case. He said he had something important to tell me later, after the guests left. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Important! And did anyone overhear this conversation? Victor shook his head. We were alone, or so I thought. At that moment, the police surgeon approached Japp with a folded note. The inspector read it, then passed it to Poirot without comment. The report was brief. Death by a single thrust of a thin, double-edged blade. No signs of struggle. The wound angled upward, suggesting the assailant was of approximately equal height or shorter. Time of death confirmed. Between 8:45 and 9 o'clock. Poirot folded the paper neatly. No struggle, therefore the victim trusted the killer. He turned his back or permitted closeness. A friend, or someone he did not fear. He moved to the shattered display case and studied the glass once more. The shards lay inward, yes, but not uniformly. A few pieces had fallen outward, as though the blow had been delivered from within the case itself. Impossible! Unless... He straightened abruptly. The necklace was not taken after the murder. It was removed before or during. Japp stared. You mean the killer smashed the case, took the necklace, then killed Sir Reginald? Or the reverse, Poirot said softly. The sequence is not yet clear. But the pieces, they begin to fit. He turned to the window. Outside, the snow had thickened into a near blizzard, swirling against the glass. Footprints in the alley beyond would already be obliterated. Yet somewhere in this glittering, blood-stained room lay the truth. And then, quite suddenly, he smiled. A small, private smile. The anonymous caller, he murmured to himself. He or she has made a mistake, a very small one, but sufficient. He did not explain further. Instead, he requested that the guests be permitted to retire to the drawing-room for tea and sandwiches. It will be a long night, he said gently, and the little gray cells require fuel. As the company filed out, Poirot remained behind, alone with the silent body beneath its velvet shroud and the glittering chandelier that watched over all like a cold, indifferent eye. The snow fell and fell, burying London in white silence, but Hercule Poirot knew that beneath the snow, beneath the glamour, beneath the lies, the truth waited, patient, precise, and inevitable. Chapter 4. Footprints in the snow. The storm had intensified during the small hours, turning the narrow service alley behind Hargrove and Sons into a white corridor of swirling flakes. By the time Poirot persuaded Inspector Japp that they must examine the rear entrance, dawn was still hours away, and the gas lamps along Bond Street flickered like weary sentinels against the onslaught. A young constable, muffled in a thick scarf, held a bullseye lantern aloft, while Poirot and Japp stood beneath the awning of the delivery door. The lock showed no sign of tampering, yet the thin layer of snow on the threshold had been disturbed, swept aside, perhaps by the careful opening and closing of the door. "There," Poirot said quietly, pointing with his neatly furled umbrella. "Regardez." In the sheltered angle where the building's wall met the alley floor, a line of footprints was clearly visible. Small, narrow impressions made by a woman's fashionable shoe with a slender heel. They emerged from the doorway, proceeded 6 or 7 paces toward the wider lane, and then abruptly ceased, as though the walker had been lifted bodily into the air. Japp stared, breath clouding in the frigid air. Vanished, just like that. No return prints either, unless the snows covered them. Poirot knelt, heedless of the damp soaking into his overcoat, and studied the marks with the aid of the lantern. "No, my friend. The snow here is undisturbed beyond this point. The prints do not return. They simply stop." He rose and scanned the blank brick wall that rose sheer above them. No drain pipe, no convenient ledge, no fire escape, only a single iron bracket where a sign once hung, far too high for even a tall man to reach without assistance. "A ladder, perhaps," Japp suggested. "Leant against the wall and then removed." Poirot shook his head. "Observe the tire tracks beneath the fresh snow, faint but unmistakable. A motor van was parked here earlier this evening, before the storm worsened. The prints of the lady end precisely where the rear of such a vehicle would have stood. She stepped into the van, the door was closed, and it drove away. Simple." Japp rubbed his cold hands together. "An accomplice, then. Someone waiting outside." "Précisément. And the van? Those tracks are wide, the tread pattern distinctive. Not a common taxicab. A commercial vehicle, I think." He turned back to the constable. "You will have these impressions photographed and cast before the snow obliterates them entirely. And the tire marks also. Back inside the warmly lit salon, the atmosphere among the remaining guests had grown brittle. The lesser patrons had been permitted to leave once their statements were taken. But the 4 principal figures, Elena Voss, Victor Langford, Clarissa Beaumont, and Felix Drummond, remained, confined to the drawing room under polite but firm police supervision. Tea had long grown cold in the Sèvres cups. Sandwiches lay untouched. Poirot entered with Japp, brushing snow from his coat. His small face was thoughtful, but his eyes held a gleam of quiet satisfaction. "Forgive the delay, mesdames et messieurs. The weather is most uncooperative, yet it has revealed 1 or 2 small truths." Elena Voss looked up sharply. "Truths, Monsieur Poirot? Have you found the necklace?" "Not yet, madame. But we have found footprints, those of a lady who left by the rear door and was collected by a waiting vehicle." A ripple passed through the group. Clarissa Beaumont's hand flew to her throat. Victor Langford turned away toward the window. Drummond merely raised an elegant eyebrow. Elena gave a brittle laugh. Then surely the murderer was an outsider after all. Some female accomplice of a thief. "Possible," Poirot conceded. "Yet the door was locked from within. The key remains on the inside still. Someone in this building unlocked it for her. Or went with her." He paused, letting the words settle. "Moreover, the timing is delicate. The murder occurred between 8:45 and 9. The guests were never absent long enough to slip out, commit the deed, and return unnoticed. Therefore, the lady must have been outside already. Waiting for a signal, perhaps?" Japp cleared his throat. "We've checked the staff. The 2 guards were at the front entrance all evening. The butler was serving drinks. The maid likewise. None of them left the building." Poirot inclined his head. "Exactly. Therefore Our Lady is not staff. She is someone who could come and go without drawing attention. Someone expected, perhaps. His gaze rested briefly on each face. Elena met it steadily, though her sapphire eyes were bright with tension. Victor avoided it. Clarissa's lips trembled. Drummond smiled faintly, as though at a private jest. Poirot continued. The tire tracks, those of a delivery van. One such vehicle made a routine delivery of flowers yesterday afternoon. The firm is local. But another set, fainter earlier, matches a larger van. A Parisian firm, I believe. Drummond et Cie uses such vehicles for transporting valuable stock across the Channel. Drummond's smile did not waver. A coincidence, monsieur. Many jewelers use similar transport, and I myself arrived by passenger steamer and taxicab. My assistant remained in Paris. Yet your firm has a branch depot in Dover, Poirot said softly. And a van was seen there 2 days ago. Curious, non? Drummond shrugged. Business is business. We move pieces constantly. But I assure you, I have no need to steal what I can design myself. Poirot turned away, apparently satisfied for the moment. But as he moved toward the door, Clarissa Beaumont rose suddenly. Monsieur Poirot? She said, her voice thin but determined. May I speak with you privately? There is something I feel I must tell you. Japp looked surprised, but Poirot merely nodded. Of course, mademoiselle. The office, perhaps, in the small office, with the safe still yawning open and papers neatly stacked now by police hands. Clarissa closed the door and faced him. Her plain face was drawn with exhaustion. I did not wish to speak before the others, she began, but Sir Reginald, he confided in me yesterday. He feared someone was planning to steal the Winter Star, not for its value, but to ruin him. He believed Monsieur Dramond intended to substitute a copy and then expose the fro to destroy Hargrove's reputation. Poirot's eyebrows rose. A copy? You imply the exhibited necklace was not genuine? No, the Winter Star was real. But Sir Reginald had commissioned an imitation for insurance purposes. A perfect copy. He kept it locked away. He told me he suspected Drummond knew of it and planned to switch them. And did he confront Monsieur Drummond? I do not know. He said only that he would deal with it after the exhibition. Poirot stroked his moustaches thoughtfully. Thank you, mademoiselle. This is most illuminating. As he escorted her back to the drawing room, a constable approached Japp with urgent news. The inspector listened, then pulled Poirot aside. They've found something in the alley dustbin, wrapped in newspaper, a woman's shoe, small size, high heel, traces of blood on the sole, and a scrap of sapphire silk caught in the buckle. Japp's eyes gleamed. Matches Mrs. Voss's gown, I'd wager. Poirot looked grave. Then the net tightens. But even as Japp moved toward the drawing room to confront Elena Voss, Poirot's expression remained troubled. Some small discord, still disturbed the symmetry of the picture. Outside, the wind howled louder, driving snow against the windows like frantic fingers seeking entry. And somewhere in the building, a clock struck 4, cold, clear, inexorable. Chapter 5. The Missing Secretary. The first pale light of a winter dawn was beginning to seep through the frosted windows when the constable's urgent knock sounded at the drawing-room door. Inspector Japp, who had been dozing in an armchair with his chin upon his chest, jerked awake and strode across the room. "What is it, Wilkins?" The young officer saluted smartly. "Begging your pardon, sir, but Miss Beaumont, she's not in her flat. Neighbor says she never came home last night. We sent a man round as routine, like you ordered, and the bed's not been slept in. No sign of her coat or handbag here, neither." A stir ran through the room. Elena Voss lifted her head, eyes wide. Victor Langford swore softly under his breath. Felix Drummond merely looked thoughtful. Poirot, who had been standing motionless by the fireplace for the past hour, turned slowly. His face was grave, but his green eyes held their customary sharpness. "Miss Beaumont is missing," he repeated quietly. "Since when, precisely?" The constable consulted his notebook. "Butler's? Says she asked to retire to the ladies' retiring room about 3:30. Said she had a headache. One of the maids showed her the way. After that, no one recalls seeing her return." Jap's jaw tightened. "She's done a bunk. That's what it looks like. Slipped out when we were all occupied with the alley footprints." Poirot raised a small hand. "Patience, mon ami. Let us not assume flight where there may be another explanation. Miss Beaumont has served Sir Reginald faithfully for 20 years. She is not a woman of dramatic gestures. If she has left, there will be reason." He turned to the maid, a flustered girl of perhaps 19, who hovered near the door. "You accompanied Mademoiselle Beaumont. Did she say anything?" "Appear agitated." The girl bobbed a curtsy. "Only that her head ached something dreadful, sir. Monsieur, I mean. She asked if there was aspirin. I fetched some from the butler's pantry. Then she thanked me and said she'd rest a little on the sofa in the retiring room. I left her there." "And the retiring room, does it have a window?" "Yes, sir. Overlooks the alley. But it's the second floor. Too high to jump." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "Too high, yes. But perhaps not too high for a knotted sheet or a drain pipe. Come, we will see." They climbed the narrow staff stairs to the small, elegantly appointed retiring room. The sofa cushions bore the faint impression of a body. A half-empty glass of water and 2 aspirin tablets lay on a side table. The window stood ajar an inch or two, letting in a blade of icy air. Snow had drifted onto the sill. Poirot examined the catch, unfastened from within. Below, in the alley, the earlier footprints had been half obliterated by fresh snow, but a new disturbance was visible. A scattered patch where something soft had fallen, and then a single set of prints, small, hurried, leading toward the street before vanishing beneath the wheels of a passing milk float. "No blood," Jap observed, "and no sign of struggle here." Poirot leaned out carefully. A stout drainpipe ran down the wall within arm's reach of the window. Scratches on the paintwork suggested recent use. "She descended," Poirot said, "with care but with determination." And then she walked away into the storm. He closed the window and turned back to the room. On the floor beneath the sofa lay a small folded sheet of notepaper. Poirot retrieved it with gloved fingers and unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, precise. "Clarissa Beaumont's. I cannot remain. I have done nothing wrong, but appearances are against me. Forgive my cowardice. I will write when I am safe." CB Jap read it over Poirot's shoulder and gave a disgusted snort. "Typical. Runs off and leaves a note to make us feel guilty. We'll have her picked up within the day. Mark my words." But Poirot was not so certain. He slipped the note into his pocket. "Appearances are against her, yes. The embezzlement she confessed to me privately, small sums, taken over years to pay for an invalid sister's care. Sir Reginald discovered it yesterday and threatened exposure. Motive, perhaps, for desperation. Strong enough for murder?" Jap asked. "Perhaps. Yet the footprint in the blood was hers in size. But her shoes here." He indicated a pair of sensible low-heeled Oxfords left neatly beneath a chair. "Show no trace of blood. And the shoe found in the dustbin, with its scrap of sapphire silk, too theatrical for Miss Beaumont's temperament." He paused, then added softly, "No, someone wishes us to believe she is guilty. The note, the open window, the flight, all arranged." They returned downstairs to find the remaining 3 suspects assembled in the salon once more. The bloodstain had been covered with a rug, but the shattered display case remained, a jagged reminder. Poirot addressed them with his customary courtesy. "Mesdames et messieurs, It seems Miss Beaumont has chosen to absent herself. This complicates matters, but it does not alter the central truth. The murderer is still among us." Elena Voss spoke first, her voice trembling. "Among us? But surely the secretary. She knew the safe combination, the alarms. She could have planned everything." Victor Langford laughed bitterly. "Convenient for the rest of us, isn't it? The drab little mouse turns out to be a criminal mastermind and flees into the night." Drummond said nothing, but his dark eyes rested thoughtfully on Poirot. The little Belgian ignored the barbs. "Let us consider what we know. The necklace is missing. The safe was opened. A woman left by the rear alley in a waiting vehicle. Another woman, Miss Beaumont, has now fled by the same route, though without assistance. And Sir Reginald was killed by someone he trusted, with a blade that has not been found." He began to pace, small steps measured and precise. "The crime appears to be theft accompanied by murder. Yet certain details disturb the symmetry. The alarm did not sound. The glass fell inward. The anonymous telephone call insisted the necklace never left the room. And now, this flight." He stopped before the central display. "I have been blind," he said suddenly. "Not to the criminal, but to the crime itself." Japp frowned. "What do you mean, Mr. Poirot?" "I mean, my friend, that we have accepted the obvious too readily. The necklace was stolen, yes. But was theft the primary motive? Or was it something else entirely?" He turned to face them all, his small figure suddenly commanding. "Consider, Sir Reginald was a proud man. His reputation was everything. To be robbed in his own salon before his guests, that would wound him deeply. But to be exposed as a fraud, that would destroy him." Elena looked puzzled. "A fraud? Reginald's jewels were the finest in London." "Precisely," Poirot said. "And yet Miss Beaumont told me he had commissioned a perfect imitation of the Winter Star for insurance purposes. A copy so flawless only an expert could detect it." Drummond stirred. "Such copies are common practice. No dishonesty there." "No," Poirot agreed. "But suppose someone planned to substitute the copy for the original during the exhibition, then later reveal the fraud, claiming Hargrove and Sons sold paste as diamonds. Reputation ruined. Business destroyed. A rival's triumph." All eyes turned to Drummond. The Parisian raised both hands, palms outward. "You accuse me, monsieur?" "I, who was invited as a guest." "Invited, yes," Poirot said softly, "but perhaps to provide opportunity." At that moment, a sergeant entered carrying a small leather jeweler's case. "Found this hidden behind the paneling in the office, sir. False back to the safe." He opened it. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay the Winter Star necklace, its diamonds blazing even in the gray morning light. But across the central clasp, dark and flaking, was a smear of dried blood. The room fell utterly silent. Poirot's voice, when he spoke, was very quiet. "The necklace never left the room. The anonymous caller spoke truth. It was hidden in haste, after the murder." He looked slowly from face to face. "And now, mes amis, the little grey cells tell me we are very close to the end." Outside, the snow had ceased at last. London lay hushed and white, waiting. Chapter 6. The Imitation Gems. The discovery of the Winter Star necklace, hidden behind the false panel of the safe and bearing its grim stain of blood, acted upon the little group like a sudden gust of Arctic air. Elena Voss pressed both hands to her mouth, her eyes fixed upon the blazing stones, as though she could not credit the sight. Victor Langford took an involuntary step backward, his face ashen. Felix Drummond alone retained his outward composure, though the fingers that held his cigarette trembled almost imperceptibly. Inspector Japp lifted the necklace with careful reverence, holding it to the morning light that now filtered grayly through the windows. The diamonds flashed with cold fire, yet the dark smear upon the platinum clasp told its own silent story. "Real enough," Jap muttered after a cursory examination. "No paste here. But how the devil did it end up back in the safe, with blood on it, when we all saw the case smashed and the necklace gone?" Poirot stood motionless, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed, not upon the necklace, but upon the faces of those assembled. "That, mon cher Jap, is the question that illuminates everything. The necklace was taken from its dome? Yes. But it was not stolen in the sense we believed. It was removed briefly, handled in haste by blood-stained fingers, and then concealed again not far away. Why? Because the murderer discovered too late that he, or she, had seized the wrong prize. Victor Langford found his voice first. The wrong prize? What on earth do you mean, Monsieur Poirot? I mean, monsieur, that the winter star upon display last night was not the true winter star. It was the perfect imitation commissioned by Sir Reginald for insurance purposes. A copy so flawless that only the most expert eye could distinguish it. The genuine necklace, the one you see before you, was kept elsewhere, in the safe, until the moment Sir Reginald intended to reveal the substitution himself. A murmur rose. Elena Voss whispered. "But why would Reginald do such a thing?" Poirot turned to her with gentle gravity. "Because, madame, your husband had come to suspect a plot. He believed someone intended to steal the exhibited necklace and later expose it as paste, thereby ruining his reputation. By substituting the imitation himself in advance, he hoped to trap the thief, to allow the theft to occur, then dramatically reveal the copy missing and the genuine stone safe. A clever counterstroke. But alas, he did not foresee that the discovery of his plan would cost him his life." Drummond crushed out his cigarette with deliberate care. "A pretty theory, monsieur, but it rests upon supposition. Where is this supposed imitation now?" Poirot smiled, a small, sad smile. "That is precisely what the murderer asked himself last night, in the moments after the fatal blow. Panic, you understand. The dome smashed, Sir Reginald slain, the necklace snatched. And then the dawning realization that the weight was wrong, the fire of the stones subtly different. In desperation, the killer opened the safe, knowing the combination from long familiarity or from observation. Seized the genuine necklace to compare, found blood upon his hands transferred to the clasp, and in terror concealed the real jewels behind the false panel, fleeing with the worthless copy instead." Jap's eyes gleamed with comprehension. "So the theft was real enough, but the prize was paste. The killer has a fortune in ice upon his person, and it's not worth a brass farthing." "Not quite worthless," Poirot corrected. "A superb imitation has value in itself, to the right buyer. But yes, the irony is exquisite." He moved to the shattered display case and lifted a loose shard of glass, turning it in his fingers. "Observe how the break is not clean. There are scratches upon the inner surface, made by a diamond-tipped tool, perhaps, from within. The substitution of the imitation was made earlier in the day, when the salon was empty. Miss Beaumont, as confidential secretary, had opportunity. But she acted upon Sir Reginald's instructions, nothing more." Elena Voss spoke again, her voice shaking. "Then the murderer killed Reginald to prevent the exposure of the planned theft?" "Exactly, madame. Sir Reginald had begun to voice his suspicions openly. He spoke to Monsieur Langford of something important to reveal after the guests departed. He confided in Miss Beaumont. Perhaps he even challenged the culprit directly. The tension became unbearable. In a moment of proximity, near the display case, the stiletto was drawn and the blow struck. Swift, silent, deadly. Victor Langford passed a hand across his forehead. "But who knew of the imitation? Only Miss Beaumont, you said, and Sir Reginald himself, and the person who originally suggested the commissioning of the copy," Poirot replied quietly. "The expert whose skill could guarantee its perfection. The rival who proposed the idea innocently, or not so innocently, knowing it could later be turned to destructive purpose." All eyes turned once more to Felix Drummond. The Parisian met their gaze steadily. "You persist in this accusation, Monsieur Poirot, yet I have no blood upon my hands, no weapon concealed about my person, and I was never alone with Sir Reginald." "Non," Poirot agreed. "But your assistant was not in Paris as you claimed. She was here, in London. A woman of discretion and skill, capable of slipping in during the afternoon confusion of floral deliveries and final preparations, substituting the imitation under your instructions. Later she waited in the alley with the van, ready to receive the stolen necklace, genuine or not. When the plan went awry, she received the worthless copy instead, and drove away into the night." Drummond's composure cracked for the first time. A muscle jumped in his cheek. "You have no proof of this fantastic tale." "Ah, but I have," Poirot said softly. "The tire tracks in the alley match those of a Drummond HC van photographed at Dover 2 days ago. The woman's shoe found in the dustbin. Size and style identical to those worn by your assistant, Mademoiselle Lefebvre, when she accompanied you to London last month. And the scrap of sapphire silk, torn from a scarf you yourself presented to her as a gift, monsieur. It was found caught in the buckle." Drummond's face went grey. "Circumstantial, perhaps," Poirot conceded. "But there is more. The blood upon the true necklace traces will match Sir Reginald's type, and upon the clasp, almost invisible to the naked eye, a fingerprint, partial but sufficient." He turned to Japp. "Inspector, I suggest you examine Monsieur Drummond's right cuff." The stiletto, a slender blade easily concealed, was wiped hastily but not perfectly. Japp moved forward with 2 constables. Drummond made no resistance as his arms were seized and his sleeves turned back. There, beneath the starched linen, a faint rust-brown stain was visible. "It is not what you think," Drummond began, but his voice lacked conviction. Poirot regarded him with something approaching pity. "You came to destroy a rival, monsieur. Not with murder. That was never the intention. But when Sir Reginald confronted you privately, showed you the genuine necklace from the safe, threatened exposure of your forgeries and your plot, the stiletto was in your hand before reason returned. Then panic, the smashed case to simulate theft, the anonymous call to mislead, the planted glove, the shoe, the silk, all to direct suspicion elsewhere." Drummond sagged between the constables. "He would have ruined me. Everything I built." Japp snapped handcuffs into place. "Felix Drummond, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove." As the Frenchman was led away, Poirot turned to the others. Helena Voss was weeping silently. Victor Langford stood as though stunned. "The case is closed," Poirot said quietly, "though much remains to be recovered. The imitation necklace, the assistant, but that is police work now." He glanced once more at the winter star, glittering innocently upon its velvet. "Beauty and greed," he murmured. "Always a dangerous combination." Outside, the pale December sun broke through the clouds for the first time, striking sparks from the fresh snow. London stirred to life again, unaware of how close catastrophe had brushed its glittering heart. But Hercule Poirot walked out into the cold morning with the satisfied air of a man whose little grey cells had once again restored order to chaos. Chapter 7. Blood on the diamonds. The morning light, thin and wintry though it was, seemed to strip the salon of its previous glamour. The chandelier hung dull and unlit. The display cases stood empty and forlorn. The covered bloodstain upon the carpet exerted a morbid fascination upon everyone present. Even the recovered winter star, now locked in a police evidence box, had lost its allure, its central clasp marred by that dark, accusing smear. Inspector Japp, his face ruddy with satisfaction at the arrest of Felix Drummond, nevertheless wore the expression of a man who knows the case is not yet entirely closed. "We've got our killer, Mr. Poirot," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Motive, opportunity, traces of blood on his cuff, the van, the assistant, everything ties up. He'll hang for it, mark my words." Poirot, seated in a small gilt chair that seemed almost too delicate for even his compact frame, regarded the inspector with a troubled air. "My dear Japp," he replied softly, "you are premature. Drummond is deeply implicated, yes. The plot to ruin Sir Reginald by substitution and exposure was his. The presence of his assistant, the van, the sapphire silk, all these point to him. But the hand that held the stiletto, I am not convinced it was his." Japp stared. "Not his? But the blood on his cuff. A trace only. Transferred, perhaps, when he handled the genuine necklace in panic, after discovering the substitution had already been made. Remember, he believed the exhibited piece was real. His plan depended upon stealing the true winter star and later exposing the imitation left behind. When he smashed the case and seized the necklace, he expected triumph. Instead, he found paste. The shock, the need to verify. He opened the safe, took out the real jewels, compared them, and in his haste left blood upon the clasp. But whose blood? Japp frowned. Sir Reginald's, surely. Precisely. Therefore the blood was already upon the murderer's hands when Drummond seized the necklace from him or her. Drummond is guilty of conspiracy, of attempted fraud, perhaps even of accessory after the fact. But the actual murder? No. Elena Voss, who had been listening in pale silence, spoke for the first time. "Then who, Monsieur Poirot? Who struck Reginald down?" Victor Langford gave a harsh laugh. "We're back to the fleeing secretary, I suppose? The faithful Miss Beaumont with her embezzlement and her invalid sister." Poirot shook his head. "Miss Beaumont is a sad figure, not a murderous one. The sums she took were small, repaid in devotion over 20 years. She fled because appearances condemned her. The open safe, her knowledge of the combination, the footprint that matched her shoe size. Someone arranged those appearances most carefully." He rose and walked slowly to the display case, gazing at the jagged hole where the dome had been. "Let us reconstruct the sequence with precision. During the afternoon, someone, acting upon Drummond's instructions, substituted the imitation for the genuine necklace. Sir Reginald discovered this. He did not immediately raise the alarm. Instead, he decided to turn the plot against its author. He left the imitation on display, planning to reveal the switch after the guests departed, exposing Drummond publicly. But the murderer could not wait. Sir Reginald, in the excitement of the evening, drew the criminal aside, perhaps to confront, perhaps to warn. They stood here by the centerpiece. Words were spoken. The stiletto appeared, swift upward thrust beneath the ribs to the throat. Sir Reginald fell. The killer, in possession of the necklace, believed the fortune secure. Then came the dreadful discovery. The stones were paste. Panic. The safe must be opened quickly, before the scream brought others running. The genuine necklace seized, compared, blood transferred. The real jewels thrust into the hidden compartment. The imitation, worthless now, taken to be passed to the waiting accomplice outside. Japp scratched his head. "But if Drummond didn't kill him, who did? We're running out of suspects." Poirot's eyes gleamed suddenly. "We have overlooked the psychology, mon ami. Greed, yes. Fear of exposure, yes. But also passion, long suppressed, twisted into hatred. he turned toward Elena Voss. "Madame," he said gently, "you loved your husband?" She lifted her chin, eyes flashing deeply. "He gave me everything. Everything except security," Poirot replied. "The new will leaving almost all to you was drafted only yesterday. But Sir Reginald confided in Miss Beaumont that he intended a further change. The bulk of his fortune to charity, small legacies to family and staff. You would remain comfortable, but no longer wealthy beyond dreams. He feared your extravagance, madame. The debts from Paris houses, the gambling at Monte Carlo. He knew." Elena's face drained of color. "That is a lie." "No, madam. Miss Beaumont confirmed it before she fled. Sir Reginald intended to announce the change tonight, after the exhibition. You overheard him speaking to her in the office. You understood what it meant. The end of luxury, perhaps even separation. In that moment, near the display, you begged him to reconsider. He refused, kindly but firmly. And then," he paused, letting the silence stretch. "The stiletto. You carried it always in your evening bag, a pretty thing from Venice, for protection in the streets. It was in your hand before you realized. One thrust. Then terror." Elena rose slowly, her sapphire gown rustling like dry leaves. "You cannot prove this fantasy." "But I can," Poirot said quietly. "The footprint in the blood. Your heel, madame, narrower and higher than Miss Beaumont's. The shoe in the dustbin, yours discarded to implicate another. The sapphire silk, torn from your own gown in the struggle, planted to suggest your innocence while casting suspicion elsewhere. The anonymous telephone call, made by you from the office extension while others searched the salon, the muffled voice to mislead." He moved closer. "And the blood upon the true necklace. Your fingers, madame, still wet when you handled the jewels in panic, seeking the fortune you believed you had secured." Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then, quite suddenly, her composure shattered. She sank back into her chair, hands covering her face, sobs shaking her shoulders. "It was not for the money alone," she whispered. "He was going to leave me, send me away. I loved him. I could not bear it." Victor Langford turned away, disgust upon his face. Japp, recovering from his astonishment, signaled to a constable. "Elena Voss, I am arresting you for the murder of Sir Reginald Hargrove." As she was led away, unresisting now, Poirot stood in silence. Outside, the weak sun climbed higher, glinting upon the snow-covered rooftops of Bond Street. Japp clapped him upon the shoulder. "Another triumph, Mr. Poirot, though I confess you had me fooled with Drummond." Poirot sighed. "A complicated affair, my friend. Two crimes intertwined, Drummond's conspiracy to ruin and Madame's crime of passion. One fed the other." He glanced once more at the empty display. "Diamonds are forever, they say. But human hearts, those are fragile indeed." And with that he retrieved his hat and coat, stepping out into the crisp December morning, leaving the house of Hargrove and Sons to its grief and its ghosts. Chapter 8. The fur coat revelation, the confession of Elena Voss, broken and tearful, seemed to draw the very warmth from the room. The constables led her away with quiet efficiency, her sapphire gown trailing like a fallen banner. Victor Langford stood frozen by the window, staring out at the snow-covered street as though he could not quite comprehend that the glittering world he had known had crumbled in a single night. Inspector Japp, practical as ever, turned to Poirot with a rueful shake of the head. "Well, that's that then. Passion and greed, always a lethal mixture. Though I'll admit, Mr. Poirot, you led me a pretty dance with Drummond. I had him pegged right from the start." Poirot permitted himself a small, melancholy smile. "Drummond was guilty, mon ami, of conspiracy, of attempted fraud, of setting his assistant to substitute the imitation. He will face charges enough to occupy him for years." But the hand that struck the fatal blow belonged to the one Sir Reginald trusted most, his beautiful, extravagant wife. Jap nodded slowly. The stiletto in her bag, the footprint, the silk, the blood on the real necklace, all fitting together now. And the new will that wasn't, threatening to take away her fortune. Enough to drive anyone to desperation. More than desperation, Poirot said softly. Terror. She believed she was losing everything, wealth, position, the man himself. In that moment, reason fled. He moved to the cloakroom where the guests' outer garments still hung in orderly rows. Elena's sable coat, magnificent, extravagant, drew his eye. He reached into the deep pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a silk handkerchief. The stiletto. Its thin blade gleamed wickedly, the Venetian handle chased with silver. Traces of blood, now dried to brown, clung to the steel. Jap gave a low whistle, hidden in her own coat. Bold as brass. Not bold, Poirot corrected, panicked. After the deed, she wiped the blade hastily and thrust it into the nearest concealment, her coat pocket in the cloakroom. She intended to retrieve it later, when suspicion had turned elsewhere. But events moved too swiftly. Victor Langford turned from the window at last, his young face haggard. I suppose I should feel relief. The estate remains as it was. Uncle's original will stands. But it feels like ashes now. Poirot regarded him with sympathy. You are young, monsieur. Time heals even the deepest wounds. And perhaps this tragedy will teach caution, at the gaming tables and in matters of the heart. Langford gave a bitter smile. Lessons learned too late. A constable entered with news. Clarissa Beaumont had been located at her sister's modest flat in Kensington. She had gone there directly, seeking refuge, not flight. She was being brought back for further questioning, but no charges were contemplated beyond the minor embezzlement, which the family, Victor, had already indicated would not be pursued. Poirot nodded. Justice must be tempered with mercy. Miss Beaumont suffered enough in silence for 20 years. Jap gathered his papers. Drummond's assistant has been picked up at Dover, trying to board the packet with the imitation necklace in her luggage. Paste or not, it's evidence now. The Frenchman himself is singing like a bird, hoping for leniency. The whole sordid plot unraveling. Poirot adjusted his overcoat and prepared to depart. At the door he paused, looking back at the salon one final time. The shattered dome had been removed, the bloodstain covered, but the air still seemed heavy with the echoes of violence. Another triumph for order and method, Jap said cheerfully. Poirot shook his head. No triumph, my friend, only sadness. A man dead, a woman destroyed, reputations tarnished, lives broken, all for glittering stones that in the end bring no warmth. He stepped out into Bond Street. The sun had strengthened, turning the snow to a dazzling whiteness. Shoppers were beginning to appear, drawn by the proximity of Christmas, their breath pluming in the cold air as they admired festive windows. Poirot walked slowly, his cane tapping upon the pavement. In his pocket lay a small card, an invitation to a quiet Christmas dinner with friends. He smiled faintly. There, at least, would be warmth, laughter, and the simple pleasures that no diamond could ever purchase. Behind him, the doors of Hargrove & Sons closed for the last time under that name. The winter collection would never be shown again. Chapter 9. The Little Grey Cells Awaken. The weak afternoon sun had already begun its early descent when Hercule Poirot requested that everyone still connected with the tragedy assemble once more in the salon of Hargrove & Sons. The room had been tidied by the police, the blood stain concealed beneath a temporary covering, the broken glass swept away, the display cases draped in dust sheets. Yet the atmosphere remained heavy, as though the violence of the previous night had seeped into the very walls. Inspector Japp stood near the door, arms folded, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and lingering doubt. Victor Langford slouched in an armchair, a glass of brandy untouched before him. Felix Drummond, handcuffs removed for the moment, but flanked by 2 constables, sat erect, his face a mask of controlled defiance. Clarissa Beaumont, newly returned from Kensington and looking pale but composed, occupied a straight-backed chair at the edge of the group. Elena Voss, under guard but permitted to attend this final gathering, sat apart, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot stood in the center of the room, beneath the great chandelier, his small figure immaculate in a dark overcoat, his moustaches perfectly waxed. He surveyed them all with calm, compassionate eyes. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began quietly, "we have reached the moment of truth. Many threads have been woven in this affair. Greed, envy, fear, passion, deception. Some of you have confessed partial truths. Others have concealed greater ones. But Hercule Poirot must have order and clarity. The little grey cells demand it." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Let us review what we know beyond dispute. Sir Reginald Hargrove was killed by a single thrust of a thin stiletto during the private exhibition of his winter collection. The centerpiece, the Winter Star necklace, appeared to have been stolen. The safe was opened. Footprints led from the rear door and vanished into tire tracks of a waiting van. An anonymous telephone call insisted the necklace had never left the room. A glove bearing Monsieur Langford's initials was found near the body. A woman's shoe stained with blood and bearing a scrap of sapphire silk was discovered in the dustbin. Miss Beaumont fled, leaving a note. Monsieur Drummond's assistant was apprehended with a superb imitation of the Winter Star. And finally, the genuine necklace was recovered from a concealed compartment, its clasp stained with Sir Reginald's blood. He raised one small hand, ticking off points on gloved fingers. Many clever diversions, many red herrings designed to confuse. But in the end, the truth is simple and terrible. He turned first to Elena Voss. "Madame, you believed you had lost everything when Sir Reginald spoke of altering his will once more. You carried the stiletto for protection. In a moment of anguish, you used it. You smashed the dome to simulate theft, seized what you thought was the priceless necklace, and in panic opened the safe to hide evidence. But the blood upon your hands transferred to the real jewels when you compared them. You planted the glove, the shoe, the silk, all to cast suspicion elsewhere. The anonymous call was yours, to mislead us into searching the room endlessly." Elena lifted her head, tears glistening. "Yes," she whispered. "It is as you say. I did it. I loved him too much, and not enough." Poirot inclined his head gravely, then turned to Felix Drummond. "Monsieur, you conceived the plan to ruin a rival. You had your assistant substitute the imitation during the afternoon. You intended to steal the genuine necklace later and expose Hargrove as a fraud. When events spiraled beyond your control, you accepted the worthless copy from Madame Voss's accomplice, your assistant, in the alley, believing it real. You allowed suspicion to fall upon yourself rather than reveal the deeper conspiracy." Drummond gave a thin smile. "A miscalculation, monsieur. I underestimated both Sir Reginald and you." Poirot nodded, then faced Clarissa Beaumont. "Mademoiselle, you took small sums over the years out of devotion to your sister. Sir Reginald discovered it and forgave you, asking only that you aid him in trapping the true criminal by preparing the substitution under his direction. When suspicion turned upon you, you fled. Not from guilt, but from fear of false accusation. Your note was honest." Clarissa's eyes filled with tears. He was always kind to me in his way. Finally, Poirot looked at Victor Langford. Monsieur, you are the one innocent of crime, yet touched by its consequences. Your gambling, your extravagance. These worried your uncle, but he never ceased to care for you. The original will stands. The estate is yours. Victor buried his face in his hands. Poirot addressed them all once more. The murder was Madame Voss's act, born of desperation and fatal passion. The conspiracy to defraud was Monsieur Drummond's. The lesser deceptions, the planted clues, the misdirections, were shared between them in the chaos after the blow, each seeking to shield themselves by incriminating others. He turned to Jap. The case is complete, mon ami. Madame Voss for murder, Monsieur Drummond for conspiracy and accessory, the rest free to rebuild shattered lives. Jap stepped forward, signaling the constables. Elena Voss rose without resistance as the handcuffs were reapplied. Drummond followed with quiet dignity. As they were led away, Poirot remained standing beneath the chandelier, his expression somber. Evil wears many masks, he said softly, almost to himself. Greed, love, fear, all can distort the soul, but in the end order is restored. Victor Langford looked up. What will happen to the business? To the winter collection? Poirot considered. Sell the jewels, monsieur. Distribute the proceeds wisely. Some to charity, as your uncle intended in his final thoughts, some to those who served him faithfully. And keep one small stone, perhaps, as a reminder that beauty can be dangerous when it becomes an obsession. He collected his hat and cane. Outside, the short winter day was already fading into twilight. Snow lay clean and untouched along Bond Street, and the first Christmas lights began to twinkle in shop windows. Hercule Poirot walked away into the gathering dusk, his footsteps crisp upon the snow, his mind already turning toward a well-earned rest and the promise of a peaceful Noel. Chapter 10. Order and method restored. The salon of Hargrove and Sons stood empty now, save for Hercule Poirot and Inspector Japp. The constables had escorted the prisoners away. Victor Langford had departed for his club, numbed and silent. Clarissa Beaumont had been driven home by a kindly sergeant with instructions to rest. Outside, the short December day had surrendered to twilight, and the first lamps along Bond Street glowed softly through the falling snow that had begun again, gentle and absolving. Japp lit his pipe, puffing contentedly. A nasty business, Mr. Poirot, but neatly tied up in the end. Madame Voss for the murder, Drummond for the conspiracy, and all the little tricks explained. Scotland Yard will get the credit, of course, but we both know whose brain did the real work. Poirot waved a deprecating hand. Credit is of no importance, mon ami. What matters is that truth has prevailed and order is restored to a world temporarily disordered. That is sufficient reward for Hercule Poirot. He moved to the shrouded display case and lifted the dust sheet for a final glance at the empty pedestal where the winter star had once blazed. Consider the irony, Japp. A necklace worth a fortune becomes the instrument of ruin. A woman who possessed every luxury destroys herself for fear of losing it. A rival who sought to crush a competitor finds himself crushed instead, and all because human nature cannot resist the lure of those cold, perfect stones. Japp nodded sagely. Diamonds are a girl's best friend, they say. More like her worst enemy in this case. Poirot permitted himself a faint smile. Indeed. Yet one must not condemn beauty itself, only the passions it awakens when placed above human hearts. He replaced the sheet and turned toward the door. Come, my friend. The hour grows late, and even detectives must eat. I have in my pocket an invitation to a small soirée tomorrow, Christmas Eve. There will be good food, a roaring fire, and pleasant company. You shall join me. Japp's eyes brightened. Don't mind if I do. My missus will be pleased to have the house to herself for an evening." They stepped out into Bond Street. The snow fell in thick, silent flakes, already softening the edges of the world. Shop windows glowed with festive displays. Holly wreaths, colored lights, pyramids of bright parcels. Carolers could be heard in the distance, their voices muffled but cheerful. Poirot drew a deep breath of the cold, clean air. Ah, Noel approaches, a time of peace, of forgiveness, of new beginnings. Poor Sir Reginald will not see it, nor Madame Voss in her cell, nor Drummond in his. But for the rest, life continues. He glanced sideways at Japp. "You know, my friend, I have often observed that crime is most frequent at Christmas. The contrasts are too great, wealth and want, warmth, and cold, joy and despair. They breed desperation," Japp grunted. "And yet here we are, walking through the snow like a pair of ordinary citizens, with another case behind us." "Precisely," Poirot said with satisfaction. "Because Hercule Poirot was present, the little grey cells were exorcised, and balance is restored. The innocent go free, the guilty face justice, and London may celebrate its Christmas in peace." They parted at the corner, Japp heading toward Scotland Yard to complete his reports. Poirot toward his flat in Whitehall Mansions, where his valet George awaited with a perfectly prepared tisane and a blazing fire. As Poirot settled into his favorite armchair that evening, a small parcel was delivered. A gift from Victor Langford. Inside lay a single small diamond, flawlessly cut, accompanied by a note. "With deepest gratitude. A reminder, as you suggested, that beauty need not be dangerous when tempered with wisdom." Poirot held the stone to the light, watching it fracture the lamplight into 1,000 sparks. Then he placed it carefully in his waistcoat pocket, close to his heart. "Bon!" he murmured to himself. "A satisfactory conclusion. The little grey cells have triumphed again." Outside his window, London lay hushed beneath its blanket of snow. Church bells began to ring in the distance, practicing for the great peal of Christmas morning. And Hercule Poirot, that most meticulous of detectives, closed his eyes for a moment, content in the knowledge that, for now, all was orderly in his world.